Your feet are deformed, not in a way anyone ever told you about, and not in a way you would notice when walking down a street. But compared to every human who lived before about 10,000 years ago, your feet are smaller, weaker, and structurally different in ways that cannot be reversed. The thing that did this to you is sitting on your floor right now. How did we go from protection from the weather to a status symbol? And when did this all start? Shoes are the most successful behavior modification technology in human evolution, and almost nobody talks about them that way. When anthropologist Eric Trinkaus examined 40,000-year-old human fossils, he found something that changed how researchers understand our species. The toe bones in these ancient remains were noticeably smaller and weaker than those in even older skeletons. Not from disease, not from injury, from footwear. Humans had started wearing shoes, and the bones were already adapting, or more accurately, already shrinking. Trinkaus was the first researcher to connect fashion directly to changes in bone structure across an entire species. What he found pushed back the timeline of shoe wearing by tens of thousands of years. Humans were reshaping their own anatomy long before anyone was keeping records. The reason makes sense once you think about it. In a harsh climate, bare feet meant frostbite, infection, and a death that came faster than most people imagine. Sharp rocks, extreme temperatures, thorns, and frozen ground were not inconveniences but immediate threats. Shoes solved a real survival problem. But here's the part that gets buried. From the very beginning, they also served a second function that had nothing to do with survival. They told everyone around you who you were. That dual nature has never left. The oldest directly dated footwear ever found came from a cave in Oregon. The sandals are over 10,000 years old, and they were not crude foot wrappings. They were woven from plant fibers using techniques that required time, skill, and planning. The people who made them understood both protection and craft. They were making something. Then, in 2008, archaeologists opened a cave in Armenia and found a single leather shoe that had been sitting there for 5,500 years. It survived because the cave was cool and dry, and because a thick layer of sheep dung had sealed it from the air like a natural vault. When they finally examined it, the shoe contained grass packed inside, and researchers still cannot agree on whether it was insulation for warmth or stuffing to hold the shape between wearings. That second possibility says something worth sitting with. Whoever owned this shoe cared enough about it to preserve its form when it was not in use. This was not a survival tool. This was property. When Manolo Blahnik, one of the most recognized shoe designers alive, examined photographs of this 5,500-year-old shoe, his response was, "It is remarkable how much this shoe resembles a modern shoe. Nothing about that should be comforting." Around the same era, a man now known as Otzi the Iceman was walking through the Alps wearing shoes that researchers, after full reconstruction, described as better than most modern hiking boots. The soles were bearskin for water resistance. The uppers were deer hide for flexibility. Tree bark netting provided internal structure. They were custom fitted to within 5 millimeters. Czech footwear expert Peter Hlavacek, who led the reconstruction and wore replicas on a 12-mile alpine hike in below freezing temperatures, called the experience walking barefoot, but only better. No blisters, feet dry and warm at minus 10 degrees Celsius. One of his colleagues put it plainly, Otzi may have been better off 5,300 years ago than most people are today. That knowledge did not survive. What survived was the status game. As civilizations organized themselves, shoes became one of the primary tools for communicating rank. Ancient Roman soldiers were issued standardized footwear that differed for the left foot and the right foot, a production and logistics feat that gave their legions a physical edge over armies whose feet were wearing down unevenly. Roman senators walked the streets in shoes secured with 4 black thongs. Emperors wore red. Patricians wore a specific dye that the lower classes were forbidden to purchase. Slaves walked barefoot, and every Roman on the street read that information instantly. The shoe on your foot was your legal status made visible. By medieval Europe, this logic had turned into something almost satirical. Between the 12th and 13th centuries, a style of shoe with a dramatically elongated pointed toe spread across the upper classes. The rule was unspoken but understood. The longer the point, the higher the wearer's station. Some of these shoes extended so far beyond the foot that the wearer had to tie chains from the tip to their leg just to walk. A man who could not walk efficiently was advertising something specific. He was telling you he did not need to work. He had people for that. This is conspicuous consumption in its most physical form. The shoe was not just a signal of wealth. It was a demonstration of how much inconvenience wealth could absorb. The most extreme version of this logic played out in China over nearly 1,000 years. Young girls had their feet broken and tightly bound to produce what was considered the ideal shape. Recent economic research argues this practice was not primarily about beauty. In a society where a woman's physical mobility was directly tied to her economic output, a bound foot was proof of something specific. It showed the family was wealthy enough to keep a woman who could not move. Nearly half of all women in China endured this. Virtually all upper-class Han women did. An entire civilization disabled half its population as a status signal delivered through footwear. The practice lasted as long as it did because of what economists call a signaling equilibrium. Families bound their daughters' feet, not because they believed in the practice on its own terms, but because failing to do so marked the family as low class. The signal became self-reinforcing. Opting out was more costly than participating. The cruelty was not the point, the signal was. Now move forward to 1852 and a Surinamese American inventor named Jan Ernst Matseliger, who built a machine that ended the handcrafting era of shoemaking in one generation. Before his automated lasting machine, a skilled craftsperson working a full 10-hour day could produce 50 pairs of shoes. Matseliger's machine produced between 150 and 700 pairs in the same time. Shoe prices dropped by half across the United States almost immediately. For the first time in human history, well-made shoes were accessible to people who worked with their hands. Better footwear meant fewer foot injuries, greater mobility, and wider economic access for millions of people at once. The lasting machine eventually merged into the United Shoe Machinery Corporation, which was worth over $1 billion 65 years later. Matseliger died at 37, broke, and nearly unknown outside specialist history. As shoes became cheap to produce, manufacturers pivoted from function to desire. When anyone could afford adequate footwear, adequate stopped being enough to sell. The industry needed people to want shoes they did not need. That shift produced the world you are living in now. High heels are worth understanding here because the origin story is so far from where the object ended up. Persian cavalry in the 10th century wore heeled boots as combat equipment. The heel locked a rider's foot into the stirrup during a fight, providing stability that could be the difference between staying mounted and dying. When Shah Abbas I led his cavalry against the Ottoman Empire, those heels were survival gear, functional as any piece of armor. Heels entered European fashion through diplomatic contact with Persia. Catherine de' Medici brought heeled shoes to France in 1533 when she married into French royalty, and a piece of military hardware began its slow transformation into a symbol of femininity and refinement. By 1670, King Louis XIV had passed a law restricting red heels to members of his personal inner circle. An invention built for men to fight wars had become a marker of aristocratic women's elegance, and eventually a contested symbol of social pressure on female bodies. The object did not change. The meaning wrapped around it changed entirely. Nike's Air Max follows the same pattern at industrial scale. The technology began with Frank Rudy, a NASA aeronautical engineer who developed methods for trapping high-density gases inside urethane airbags for aerospace applications. Rudy brought this concept to Nike as a cushioning system. Nike designer Tinker Hatfield was sent to Paris for inspiration and encountered the Centre Pompidou, a building constructed inside out, with its pipes, heating ducts, escalators, and ventilation systems on the exterior, painted in bright colors. Hatfield took that architecture and applied it to a shoe. Instead of hiding the air cushioning in the sole, he made it visible. He cut a window into the midsole so buyers could see the technology they were paying for. The Air Max 1 launched in 1987. The visible air bubble became one of the most recognized design elements in consumer product history, instantly identifiable from across a room, nearly impossible to convincingly replicate. Today's athletic shoes are platforms for material science, biomechanical engineering, computer modeling, and manufacturing processes borrowed from aerospace and automotive industries. The Air Max Scorpion, unveiled in 2022, was engineered using digital tools and data-driven pressure mapping. A high-end running shoe now carries more research investment than entire product categories from previous decades. The global footwear market was valued at $477 billion in 2025 and is projected to reach $676 billion by 2033. Women's footwear accounts for 48% of that market. Asia Pacific holds 41% of global market share. Over 30% of footwear is now purchased online. The market for smart shoes, shoes with embedded sensors for gait monitoring, temperature regulation, and adaptive cushioning, is projected to reach approximately $2 billion in 2025. Some manufacturers can now create custom shoes from a smartphone scan of your foot, delivered at prices that were unimaginable 2 decades ago. Sitting directly alongside all of this is a growing body of research suggesting that shoes are making human feet worse. We all have a memorable shoe from childhood. I once put plastic grocery bags in my winter boots during the spring to stop puddles from seeping in. Do you have an awesome or not so awesome shoe memory from childhood? I would love to hear about it. Populations that go barefoot regularly have wider feet, stronger arches, and fewer structural deformities than populations that wear shoes consistently. Cushioned heels encourage a heel-striking walking pattern that generates more joint impact than the midfoot landing used by barefoot walkers. Women who wear high heels regularly develop smaller calf muscles and altered walking mechanics that persist even when they are barefoot. Shoes worn during childhood development may contribute to fallen arches and flat feet. The same technology that kept your ancestors alive by protecting their feet from frozen ground may be, over generations of use, weakening the very structures it was built to protect. Your feet are smaller and weaker than the feet of people who lived 40,000 years ago. The bones adapted to the shoe. The shoe did not adapt to the bones. And right now, sitting on your floor, the process continues. That is 40,000 years of human ingenuity pointed at your feet. Whether it made them better is a question nobody agrees on yet, but you will never look at a pair of shoes the same way again.